Since Clear Lake and Todd Boehly have taken over Chelsea Football Club, the question has been, is it ambition or is it madness? And for me, this transfer window verges on madness. Chelsea could finish third or they could finish 13th. That's where they stand right now, and that's as a result of Chelsea having so many players. I need Chelsea to stop. I need Chelsea to stop buying players. For a lot of Chelsea fans, it feels like the soul has been sucked out of the football club. In terms of this ownership group, I don't know if this story has a happy ending. Since Clear Lake and Todd Boehly have taken over Chelsea Football Club, the question has been, is it ambition or is it madness? And for me, this transfer window verges on madness. Chelsea have got over 40 first-team players in their squad. The season is kicking off ASAP, and Chelsea don't necessarily know what their first 11 is, don't necessarily know what their squad is. And this is the Chelsea team that have got a new manager in Enzo Maresca, a manager that's only managed the Championship. Granted, he did a very good job at Leicester and he helped them gain promotion, but it's a Chelsea team that lacked direction. And previously, the direction had come from the ownership group, from Roman Abramovich, from Marina Granovskaya. Those people are not at the club anymore. And for a lot of Chelsea fans, it feels like the soul has been sucked out of the football club. Granted, there's an array of talented players at the club, but nobody knows who's coming or going. These long contracts, these protracted deals. The Conor Gallagher deal is an example of that, in terms of a player that last season played 37 league games for Chelsea, started 37 league games, was the captain for the majority of those games. Chelsea effectively forced him out because of PSR regulations or PSR constrictions, but that deal couldn't be seen through. They made him fly back from Atletico to Cobham. He's now training by himself as Chelsea try to work a resolution. So when you look at this Chelsea squad going into this new season, despite the fact that there is so much uncertainty, the one glimmer of hope is that there is a lot of quality in this Chelsea squad. So if Enzo Maresca can figure out what his best 11 is, can embed his philosophy within this team, then Chelsea might play good football, but it really depends on how quickly this team can come together. Chelsea could finish third or they could finish 13th. That's where they stand right now, and that's as a result of Chelsea having so many players in this squad and so many unknowns going into this new season. Chelsea are having to pay the price in terms of Conor Gallagher leaving the club because of poor spending decisions in the past. Whether it's the first flurry of players that this board brought in, when you look at the likes of Raheem Sterling, Marc Cucurella, Koulibaly, Aubameyang, that was the first transfer window that Clear Lake and Todd Boehly had at Chelsea Football Club. Clearly, barely any of those players have worked out at the club. And then you look at the second flurry, you look at the players like Moises Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez, Mudryk. Again, these players are still at the football club, but we haven't seen the best of them in a Chelsea football shirt. And so the fact that Conor Gallagher, players like Gallagher and Chalobah, are now having to pay the price for Chelsea's poor decision in the past, or poor decisions in the past, it just tells you where the football club are at. These are players that understand what it means to be a Chelsea player. These are players that came through the academy. They should not be as expendable as they are. They should not be treated as they are. But as a result of poor decisions in the past, Chelsea are forced to sell players that really connect the fans to the team. Fans live vicariously through academy prospects. And in the 1920 season under Frank Lampard, Chelsea were littered with academy prospects. That's when we saw the emergence of Reece James. That's when we saw the emergence of Fikayo Tomori, of Mason Mount. And a lot of those players are not at the football club anymore. And the Chelsea academy products that are at the football club are not being treated as respectfully as I think they should. So Chelsea are in this position, not because they've been backed into a corner, but because of poor decisions made in the past by this group. I'm under no illusions that in previous iterations of Chelsea, when Chelsea had midfielders like Michael Essien, Frank Lampard, Michael Ballack, Deco, Conor Gallagher wouldn't be a Chelsea player, or he wouldn't play significant minutes. But it's a very, very different Chelsea side. This is a Chelsea side that finished 12th last season. This is a Chelsea side that have struggled for the last couple of years. And so, with that being said, this is a Conor Gallagher that does lack a bit of quality when it comes to his ability on the ball, but he gives everything for the shirt. We've seen his running stats. We've seen how good he was in comparison to the other Chelsea midfielders last season. And so when it comes to bringing him back into the squad or reintegrating him, I think that it's a must if we can't get the deal done with Atletico, because Conor Gallagher was so significant for Chelsea last season. Like I mentioned, he played 37 league games for Chelsea last year. The only league game that he missed was through suspension. He led Chelsea out in in the League Cup final against Liverpool. He was integral to Chelsea last year. Chelsea side that did end up finishing 6th. And so if the deal with Atletico can't get done, I'd definitely bring Conor Gallagher back to Chelsea. I don't necessarily think it will be a disaster for Armando Broja. What you do have to consider, though, is Ipswich have just signed Sammy Smodic from Blackburn, a man who scored 27 league goals last season, the top goal scorer in the Championship. You expect him to be Ipswich starter next year. Armando Broja needs to go and find a home to play football, whether that's on loan or permanently. He needs to find somewhere where he can play regular football. He's not been the same since the knee injury a couple of years ago. A player with so much promise. We saw how good he was at Southampton, but he needs a confidence. He needs a manager that believes in him, and we know his time at Chelsea is done. So whether it's permanently or on a loan this year, Armando Broja needs to leave the football club for the betterment of his career, because a couple of years ago we really saw something there. We saw a spark with Armando Broja, and he needs to go and rediscover that, whether that's at a Premier League side, whether that's at a Championship side. I think that if given the minutes and given the responsibility and given the time to develop, I think Armando Broja can be a very effective forward for any team that he goes to. So Chelsea in the last couple of transfer windows have bought potential. They've bought players that may develop into something. In some instances, it's worked. In the case of Cole Palmer, in a lot of the other instances, it hasn't worked. In the form of Victor Osman, you've got a man who has delivered. A couple of years ago, he was the hallmark of that Napoli side that won Serie A, scored a lot of goals, and was really one of the best strikers in the world. Last year, because of various reasons, whether it's playing at AFCON or being injured, he couldn't really find his feet, but still scored a fair few goals in Serie A. In football these days, we get bogged down by tactics and whether players will fit managers' systems. I've heard Chelsea fans talk about the fact that Osman might not fit Enzo Maresca's system. We need to get away from the X's and O's and concentrate on the Jims and the Joes. When it comes to football, you want to bring in players who know what it's like to be the man, who know what it takes to deliver trophies. And in Victor Osman, despite the fact he's only won one major trophy in the form of a Serie A title in his career, he's a superstar. And Chelsea need more of that in this team, because ultimately, players win you games. And Osman's a player that I've seen play in various systems, whether it's for Nigeria or for Napoli, or I even saw him 4 or 5 years ago playing for Lille against Chelsea in the Champions League. He was an absolute handful. And so Victor Osman's a man that I would love to see being brought through the door at Stamford Bridge, because I think he adds that X factor, and he might finally be able to break that curse to Chelsea number 9, which existed since Diego Costa left the club in 2017. So this is Lukaku's second spell at Chelsea, and it's been a disaster, let's be completely honest. He started like a house on fire. We all remember Chelsea coming off the back of winning the Champions League in 2021, bringing in Lukaku. That was viewed as a final piece of Thomas Tuchel's formidable Chelsea side. And I remember pundits on talkSPORT, Simon Jordan, saying any team that finishes ahead of Chelsea will win the Premier League. Chelsea were one of the favourites to win the league that season. Lukaku comes in on his debut, absolutely bullies Arsenal, scores a goal, and everybody thinks Chelsea are set for the title. 3 months later, we remember the Sky Italia interview where he's essentially pining for Inter Milan, and that was him dead in the water at Chelsea. The fans never forgave him. He could never get back on side, and Lukaku's career at Chelsea has been floundering ever since. He's had a couple of loans to various clubs in Italy, and we've not quite seen the player that he was 3 or 4 years ago. So for me as a Chelsea fan, for somebody who follows the club very, very closely, I think Lukaku's time is done, and it's imperative that Chelsea get him out the door this window, because he does not have a future at Stamford Bridge. If he can be used as a make weight in the Victor Osimhen deal, then I think Lukaku should be out the door this summer, and Osimhen hopefully coming the other way to bolster this Chelsea attack that, as we all know, needs bolstering, because last season Chelsea severely lacked a direct number 9. It's a very, very difficult situation for Chelsea, because I look at 3 clubs as being the prestigious clubs in this country. If you look at Liverpool, you look at Manchester United, and look at Arsenal, they are the legacy clubs in English football. Chelsea have always traded on the fact that, first of all, they're based in London, in a very trendy part of London. And secondly, Chelsea have consistently had Champions League football to attract the best players in the world. For the last couple of seasons, Chelsea haven't had that. So they've had to offer extortionate contracts, which players have got the guarantee of being paid by one of the top clubs in the world for 6 or 7 years. Contracts that we've never really seen in football before. And so Chelsea are having to play tricks and to use different methods to attract the top players in football. And then you have to ask about players' motivation. Why do you want to come to Chelsea Football Club at this moment in time? it looks like a bit of a mess. It looks like there's no real direction. So if Chelsea managed to convince players to join the club, what is that player's motivation? They're no longer joining one of the best teams in the country or one of the best teams in Europe. They're joining a team that's in flux right now. And so Chelsea attracting the top players in the world has become more difficult, but I still think there's the allure of playing in London, of playing in the Premier League. And also a lot of these players grew up in an era where Chelsea were very, very dominant, winning league titles, winning Champions Leagues. And in the case of Victor Osman, he's talked publicly about how Didier Drogba is his idol, how he grew up as a Chelsea fan because of the African contingent at Chelsea, the likes of Michael Essien, John Obi Mikel, Didier Drogba, Salomon Kalou. And so I can understand why the move is attractive for a player like Victor Osman, but that's because he has an allegiance to the club anyway. For other top players, it will be quite difficult to attract them to Stamford Bridge because of the way that Chelsea are operating at the moment and the situation they find themselves in. Pedro Neto is a player that I'm a big fan of. I love the way he plays football, but he doesn't play football enough. He doesn't play regularly enough. And this is a big fee for a player that you expect to come in and start, but a player that you know has injury concerns. And so maybe the change of environment will change that in terms of his availability and his ability to stay fit. But my concern is for £54 million that is rising if you add the add-ons and if he hits those markers to make those add-ons apply. My concern is he just doesn't play enough and he's not consistent enough to really be a top player and to take Chelsea where they need to go. What I will say is that Pedro Neto fits into what Enzo Maresca wants to do. He wants to play with wide wingers that hug the touchline. And you've seen Pedro Neto do that a fair bit for Wolves. And so in terms of him fitting into Enzo Maresca's system, which is a big talking point and a hot point for Chelsea fans right now because of how specific Enzo Maresca is when it comes to philosophy, I think Pedro Neto works. In terms of the reality of the situation, I just don't know if he's going to stay fit enough for Chelsea fans to really buy into him. Chelsea have got such a bloated squad. Enzo Maresca is a man that is very specific when it comes to tactics. So you can understand why the board threw him a bone and allowed him to bring a player that understands his system. And that's credit to the board. I criticised Liverpool a lot this summer because they've yet to make a signing. And you feel like with a new manager coming in, you have to allow them to bring in some of the personnel that they know. So credit to Bowley and Clearlake and Igbali for allowing Enzo Maresca to bring in Kiernan Dewsbury Hall. And he's a player that impressed in the Championship last season. I remember Leicester played Chelsea in the Cup. Chelsea won that game at Stamford Bridge, but Kiernan Dewsbury Hall was a menace. He was very, very deft with his touches. He was picking up those half spaces and he was making things happen for that Leicester side. And so I think he has a part to play in this Chelsea team. Whether he starts from the off, it remains to be seen. But I remember Maresca talking after his first pre-season game and talking about the levels that Kiernan Dewsbury Hall was at in comparison to the other Chelsea players because he understood what Maresca wanted from him. So I think he's going to be a lieutenant. He's going to be somebody that will help the other players understand what Maresca wants. But whether he's a long-term starter for Chelsea and whether he's got the quality to start week in, week out in the Premier League remains to be seen. I've talked to a lot of football fans, a lot of people who are trying to decipher and understand what Bowley and Clearlake are doing when it comes to the transfer window. And then I've talked to some business insiders who actually understand the mechanics and the finances of football. And they've assured me that these people are shrewd businessmen. And so there has to be a plan. This just can't be a random act of throwing things at the wall and hoping it sticks. There has to be a long-term plan in terms of the recruitment strategy for Chelsea. For me personally, I've talked about the X's and O's as opposed to the Jims and the Joes. And I want to see big name players being brought into Chelsea football clubs, players that understand what it takes to play at the top level. And when you see a Fabrizio Romano tweet saying, here we go, Alex Crook confirming that Chelsea have made a new signing, it's a player under the age of 21 and you don't know who that player is, it doesn't fill me with joy. It doesn't give you that buzz that, say, a Victor Osman would give you or a top player would give you. And so you can see the approach from Chelsea in terms of recruiting young because you can pay these players fairly or comparatively low wages in terms of what you pay those top superstars. But you need players to come and affect winning, and I don't think Chelsea have been the best at that in terms of recruitment in this transfer window. I need Chelsea to stop. I need Chelsea to stop buying players. It's been too much. It's been an overload. I mentioned how you used to get a buzz when your team signs a player. Now when Chelsea sign players, there's a sense of dread. It's like, who is this? Are we going to have to pay the price for this further down the line in the form of a transfer ban? Is this adhere to PSR? Is this right? Who is this player? And so I need Chelsea to stop bringing in players. If they can get the Victor Osman deal done, that will suffice. Chelsea need a number 9 who can put the ball back in there on a regular basis, but I don't need Chelsea to bring in any more players because, like we've mentioned and like we've talked ad nauseum, Chelsea have got a very, very bloated squad, and the priority between now and the end of the transfer window is to offload some of those players. Out of 10, I'll give Chelsea a 3. I respect the ambition. I respect the fact that they are putting their hands in their pockets. And if you juxtapose that to other American owners that have come into the Premier League, if you remember Hicks and Gillette at Liverpool, the biggest issue that Liverpool fans had with them is that they weren't spending money. And so it puts you in a strange position, right? A lot of football fans, their biggest gripe with the owners is that the ownership group don't spend money, don't reinforce the squad. Chelsea fans want this ownership group to stop because we can't see the wood from the trees right now. We don't understand what the strategy is. That hasn't been communicated to Chelsea fans. I interviewed Joe Cole for talkSPORT a few days ago, and he said the same thing. He said he respects the ambition from the owners. They put their hands in the pocket. They've been in the club for 2 years, and you can't question the ambition, but they need to communicate the vision to Chelsea fans for Chelsea to really understand where we're going. It feels a bit directionless at the moment. Chelsea and the fans are not on the same page. And I think that can be a problem. If Chelsea don't start the season well, and it's a very difficult start to the season against Man City, it could be problems. You could hear vocal disapproval at Stamford Bridge very early on because Chelsea are a side that struggled last year. Towards the back end of the season, came good. The fans were bought in on the idea of Poch eventually. The board got rid of Poch, or Poch walked, and now we have to go again with a new manager. And so, yeah, it's important for Chelsea to start the season well. But in terms of this ownership group, I don't know if this story has a happy ending.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.